The letter arrived 4 days before Christmas. At first, I thought it was a mistake. After 12 years in military service, I had gotten used to silence from home, not the peaceful kind, the distant kind. Messages that came late, short calls that ended too quickly, and updates that always felt like I was being informed about a life I wasn't fully part of anymore. But this envelope was different. No stamp of urgency, no printed label, just my father's handwriting across the front. Careful, controlled, familiar in a way that hit harder than I expected. I stood in my apartment for almost a minute just staring at it. For reasons I couldn't explain, I smiled. I hadn't seen his handwriting in years. Maybe things are finally changing, I said quietly. I had just retired from active duty 2 months earlier. 12 years of deployments, rotations, field hospitals, emergency evacuations, everything that had become normal for me, but unimaginable for most people. Retirement wasn't supposed to feel strange, but it did. Because for the first time in over a decade, I wasn't going home for a short visit. I was going home to stay. I placed the envelope on the kitchen table and made coffee before opening it. Old habit from the field. Never rush something that might change everything. Outside, winter pressed against the windows. Snow drifted down in slow layers over the city streets. Christmas lights blinked from neighboring apartments, warm and distant at the same time. Inside mine, everything felt paused. I sat down, took a breath, and finally opened the envelope. The paper inside was folded once. Simple. No greeting except my name. Rachel, it began. I read the first line slowly. Then again, I think it would be better if you do not come home for Christmas this year. My hand stopped moving. I read it again, expecting it to feel different the second time. It didn't. I kept reading. Things at home are complicated right now. Your presence would only make things harder. Please respect this decision. No explanation followed, no warmth, no hesitation, just distance written like instruction. The final line hit hardest. Do not try to convince us otherwise. Signed, Dad. No love, no we'll talk later, no acknowledgement of everything I had sacrificed to even make it back home for good. Just finality. I sat back slowly in my chair, still holding the letter. My brain tried to process it like a report, clean, logical, but nothing about it felt logical. I had spent years imagining this moment, my mother hugging me at the door, my father giving me that quiet nod he always gave when he approved of something but refused to say it out loud, my brother Ethan laughing that I still walked like I was on base. I had pictured noise, warmth, belonging. This letter erased all of it in 4 sentences. My phone was already in my hand before I realized it. Dad's contact was still saved, still labeled the same way. My thumb hovered over the call button, just one tap. Then I stopped. Something about the letter didn't feel angry. It didn't feel emotional at all. It felt written, like a decision that had been processed and finalized before it ever reached me. I lowered the phone slowly. The silence in my apartment suddenly felt heavier than before. I looked toward the small Christmas tree in the corner. Wrapped gifts sat neatly underneath. One for my mother, one for Ethan, one for my father. I had planned everything carefully. Flights booked, leave approved, a return home after years away. Now the plan didn't feel like a celebration anymore. It felt like something I was no longer invited to. I kept staring at the letter long after I finished reading it. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. And that was the problem. It wasn't written like something that could be argued with. There was no space inside it for misunderstanding, no emotional gap to step into and fix things. Just a clear instruction: don't come. I finally set it down on the table. My apartment felt quieter than it should have. I reached for my phone again, slower this time. If my father had really sent this, then someone else in the family would know. Someone would react. Someone would explain. I opened my messages first. Ethan, my brother. The preview loaded instantly. See you soon. Don't forget Mom's cookies this year. I frowned. See you soon. I looked back at the letter on the table. The contrast didn't make sense. One message told me not to come. The other assumed I already was. I opened the conversation. No mention of the letter. No confusion, no question. Just normal conversation about Christmas preparations. A second message followed a few minutes later. Mom's already planning dinner. Don't be late this time. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. I switched to my mother's chat. She had sent a photo of the living room. Christmas decorations were already up. A tree lit in warm yellow light. Stockings hung neatly along the wall. No caption. No mention of anything unusual. I set the phone down. Slowly. That's when the first real doubt formed. Not emotional doubt. Structural doubt. Because if my father had sent a message like this, cold, final, absolute, then the household reaction didn't match it. Either they were all hiding the same truth, or only one version of reality was being shared with me. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the letter again. My training kicked in without me thinking about it. Assess. Reconstruct. Verify inconsistencies. Step 1. Intent. The tone suggested finality, not conflict. Step 2. Timing. The letter had clearly been written recently, ink fresh, paper standard. No signs of long-term preparation. Step 3. Communication pattern. This was the biggest problem. My father never made unilateral emotional decisions. Not without pressure, not without discussion. Even at his worst, he argued. He didn't cut people off silently. This didn't match him. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city kept moving like nothing had changed. Inside, something already had. My phone buzzed again. This time, Ethan calling. I hesitated before answering. "Hey," I said. His voice came through casually. "Hey, you okay? Mom said you got your schedule confirmed." I paused. "My schedule?" "Yeah," he said. "Your flight. You're still landing on the 23rd, right?" My eyes slowly drifted back to the letter on the table. "I don't know yet," I said carefully. A short silence. Then Ethan laughed lightly. "Don't overthink it. Dad's just being dad. You know how he gets before holidays." My throat tightened slightly. Before holidays. So he knew something. Or at least he knew a version of something that didn't include the letter I was holding. "I got a message from him," I said slowly. The line went quiet, for half a second too long. Then Ethan spoke again. "What kind of message?" That pause changed everything, because if this was normal, he wouldn't have needed to ask. I looked down at the letter again. "I'll tell you later," I said finally. Then I ended the call. My hand stayed on the phone for a moment longer than necessary. Something was off, not just emotionally, logically. And I had learned long ago in the field that when details don't align, it's not confusion, it's concealment. I picked up the letter again, and for the first time since opening it, I stopped reading it like a daughter and started reading it like a problem. I didn't tell anyone about the letter after that call. Not because I forgot, because something in Ethan's voice had changed the problem. It was no longer just about what my father had written. It was about what everyone else already knew and what they were choosing not to say. My flight was still booked for the 23rd. I checked it 3 times that night. No cancellations, no changes, no updates from home either. Just silence sitting on top of everything like it belonged there. The next morning, I packed anyway. Not because I had decided what to do, but because I needed to see it for myself. 2 months of retirement hadn't erased 12 years of conditioning. When something feels wrong, you don't sit and guess. You move closer. The airport was busier than I expected for a weekday morning. People rushing, families meeting, holiday chaos building early. I stood in line with my bag and watched it all like I was outside it. Normal life always looked different after service, like something I used to belong to but no longer fully fit inside. My phone buzzed once. "Ethan, you still coming, right?" No explanation, no mention of the letter, just expectation. I stared at the message for a long moment, then locked the screen without replying. At the check-in counter, I handed over my ID. The woman scanned it, typed something, then paused. "Just a moment," she said. That pause was small, but my body registered it immediately. Too many pauses in my life had come before bad news. She looked at her screen again, then back at me. "I'm sorry," she said. "Your reservation has been modified." My chest tightened slightly. Modified how? She turned the monitor toward me. The flight was no longer confirmed. It had been canceled. Not delayed, not rescheduled. Canceled. My first reaction wasn't shock. It was calculation. Because airlines don't cancel confirmed military-linked bookings without either external instruction or administrative override. "Was there a reason listed?" I asked. She shook her head. "Just says passenger request." I didn't respond immediately. Passenger request. That wasn't me. I stepped away from the counter before my expression gave anything away. Outside the terminal, the cold air hit harder than it should have. I checked my phone again. No notification, no email, no confirmation, just silence where a cancellation should have come from. Then Ethan called again. This time, I answered. "What did you do?" I asked immediately. A pause. "What do you mean? My flight is canceled." Another pause, but shorter this time. "That's weird," he said. Too fast, too light, like he had already prepared for the question. "I didn't cancel it," I said. "I know," he replied quickly. "Maybe it's airline issues. You know how chaotic it gets during Christmas." I looked up at the departure board inside the terminal glass. Flights were running. Mine was the only one gone. "I got a letter from Dad," I said. Silence. Not long, but heavy enough to matter. Then Ethan spoke more carefully. "Yeah, I figured." That sentence landed wrong, not because of what he said, but because of how easily he said it. "You figured?" I repeated. Another pause. "Just come home first. We'll talk when you get here." That wasn't an answer. That was a deflection, and I heard enough of those in uniform to recognize them instantly. I ended the call. Standing outside the airport, I finally accepted what I had been avoiding since yesterday. This wasn't a misunderstanding between me and my father. This was a controlled situation, and I was already on the outside of it. I opened the letter again, read the first line slowly. "I think it would be better if you do not come home for Christmas this year." The wording suddenly felt less like rejection and more like instruction, like someone had already decided what I was allowed to do. My grip tightened slightly around the paper, because now the question wasn't why did he write it, it was becoming something more uncomfortable. Who made sure I would actually receive it and follow it? And somewhere in the distance, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan, this time only 5 words. "Just trust me, okay?" And for the first time since opening the letter, I realized I didn't know who home was supposed to be anymore. I didn't go back to the airport again, not immediately. Instead, I stood outside for a long time, watching people move through departures like nothing in the world had changed. That was the strange part about moments like this. The world didn't pause just because yours did. Ethan's last message stayed on my screen. "Just trust me, okay?" Trust. It was a simple word, but in my line of work, it was never simple in practice. I opened my contacts again and scrolled to my mother, hesitated, then called. She answered on the second ring. "Rachel?" she said, like she was surprised I'd called at all. "Did Dad send me a letter?" I asked directly. A pause. Too long. That's not something to talk about over. By the time I reached home, I already knew something was wrong. Not from anything someone had said, from what they didn't say. The silence between my mother's words on the phone had been too careful, too practiced, like she was avoiding stepping on something she knew would explode if pressed. And Ethan's messages, short, controlled, always redirecting me back home without explanation, had stopped feeling like reassurance. They felt like containment. The taxi pulled up in front of the house just after sunset. Same house, same street, same Christmas lights wrapped around the porch railing, but it didn't feel the same. It felt staged, like someone had prepared it for a version of me that didn't ask questions. I stepped out with my bag and stood still for a moment. No one came outside. That was the first thing that felt off. Normally, my mother would have been waiting. Even when I came back injured once on leave, she had been there before the car even stopped. This time, nothing. I walked up the driveway slowly. The front door opened before I reached it. My father stood there. Not angry, not emotional, just tired. For a second, I studied him like I would study a report after a failed operation. His posture was slightly slower than I remembered. His expression held a hesitation that didn't belong to him. "Rachel," he said. Just my name. No follow-up, no acknowledgement of anything unusual. I stepped inside. The house smelled the same, cleaning detergent, wood polish, and something slightly burnt from the kitchen, but the atmosphere didn't match the scent. My mother appeared from the hallway. She smiled too quickly, too carefully. "Sweetheart, you made it," she said. Not, "We're glad you're here," just acknowledgement. Behind her, Ethan stood near the living room entrance, hands in pockets, avoiding eye contact. 3 people, same house, but no alignment between them. That was the first real red flag. In families, even broken ones, emotional reactions still sync. Shock, relief, guilt, anger, something overlaps. Here, nothing did. I placed my bag down slowly. "So, are we going to talk about the letter?" The room tightened instantly. Not physically, socially. My mother's smile faltered for half a second before returning. "What letter?" she asked lightly. That was the second red flag, because it wasn't confusion, it was avoidance. My eyes moved to Ethan. He looked down, just for a second, then back up. "We'll talk later," he said. Always later, never now. My father cleared his throat. "It's been a long trip. You should rest first." I studied him. He wasn't lying, but he wasn't answering either, and that distinction mattered. "I didn't come here for rest," I said quietly. Silence followed. Christmas lights outside flickered slightly through the window, casting warm tones across a room that suddenly felt colder than the street outside. My mother stepped forward. "Rachel, please don't make this difficult." That sentence landed heavier than anything else, not because of the words, but because of the assumption behind them that I was already the problem. I looked at her carefully. Difficult for who? No answer. Ethan finally spoke. "Can we just not do this tonight?" I turned toward him fully now. That's exactly what I've been told since I got the letter. That word changed the air again. Letter. My father shifted slightly. My mother looked away. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Dad didn't mean... I cut him off. What did he mean then? No one answered. That silence was becoming familiar now. Too familiar. And I realized something in that moment. This wasn't a misunderstanding I had walked into. This was a situation that had already been stabilized before I arrived, and I was the only unstable variable left in it. I stepped back slightly, looking at all of them in turn. "One of you is going to explain it," I said calmly. No reaction, no correction, no denial, just avoidance. And that was worse than anything they could have said, because avoidance meant agreement, just not out loud. Outside, the wind pressed against the house. Inside, no one moved. And for the first time since opening that letter, I understood that coming home hadn't been the resolution. It had been the next phase of something I hadn't been told I was already part of. The silence didn't break. It just shifted. Like everyone in the room had agreed, without speaking, that I wasn't going to get answers easily. I watched my father carefully. He was still standing near the doorway, but something about him felt slightly delayed. Not absent-minded in a casual way, more like he was constantly catching up to the moment he was in. That wasn't normal for him. My father had always been precise. Even emotionally reserved, he was consistent. This version of him wasn't consistent. "Dad," I said slowly, "do you remember what you wrote to me?" A flicker crossed his face. Not anger, not denial, something closer to confusion. "My letter?" he asked. My mother stepped in quickly. "Rachel, don't." "No," I interrupted, keeping my eyes on him. "Let him answer." He frowned slightly. "I told you not to come," he said finally, as if recalling it from somewhere distant. That wasn't how memories should work, not for something that important. I took a step forward. "Why?" He hesitated. That hesitation lasted too long. "I thought it would be better." "For who?" No answer. Behind him, Ethan shifted his weight, uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze. That movement didn't go unnoticed, because Ethan wasn't confused. He was careful, and careful people usually knew more than they admitted. My eyes moved to him. "You've been dodging this since I arrived," I said. He exhaled. "I'm not dodging anything." "Then explain it," I replied. Silence again. My mother rubbed her hands together nervously. "Rachel, it's been stressful for your father lately. He gets overwhelmed, that's all." That sentence should have ended it, but it didn't, because it didn't explain the coordination, the flight cancellation, the identical avoidance, the unified silence. I looked back at my father. "Did you cancel my flight?" His expression changed immediately. "What? No." That was the first clear reaction I'd seen from him. It wasn't rehearsed. It was instinctive, which meant the answer was likely true. I turned slightly toward Ethan. He didn't meet my eyes. That was enough. "You didn't cancel it either." Ethan shook his head quickly. "No, I told you that." My gaze narrowed. "So someone else did." No one responded, and that silence told me something simple. Access existed, authority existed, but no one wanted to admit who used it. I stepped closer to the center of the room. I'm not asking for opinions anymore. I'm asking for facts. My mother looked anxious now. My father looked tired. Ethan looked cornered. And that combination told me something even more important. They weren't united. They were protecting different parts of the same truth. I turned back to my father. "Did you ever say you didn't want me home?" He blinked slowly. "I said," he paused, searching. "I said it might not be the right time." That wasn't the same as the letter, not even close. My chest tightened slightly. "So the letter," I said, "was stronger than what you actually said." Ethan finally spoke. "Dad didn't write it like that." All eyes turned to him. He froze for a fraction of a second after realizing he'd spoken too quickly, but it was too late. "What do you mean?" I asked immediately. He hesitated, then corrected himself. "I mean, he was upset. Things got misinterpreted." That word again, misinterpreted. It was becoming a pattern. I stepped toward him slowly. "Misinterpreted by who?" No answer. Not this time, just silence. And that silence confirmed something I didn't want to accept yet. The letter wasn't the problem. The communication around it was. Someone had taken a vague conversation and shaped it into something final, something absolute, something that looked like rejection. I looked at all three of them again. One of them knew exactly how that happened, and one of them was trying very hard to make sure I didn't ask the next question, but I already was. "Who controlled my access to this house while I was away?" I asked quietly. The room went still. No one answered, but this time, even silence felt like an answer forming. The question changed the room, not because it was loud, but because it was precise. Who controlled my access to this house while I was away? For the first time since I walked in, no one answered immediately. That delay told me more than anything they had said so far. My father looked confused again, but this time it wasn't about memory. It was about understanding the question itself. "What do you mean, controlled access?" he asked slowly. I didn't take my eyes off him. Mail, calls, messages, anything that reached me from here. My mother inhaled sharply. Ethan shifted his stance. And that reaction, small, instinctive, was enough. Because it confirmed something simple. There was control, just not something they wanted named out loud. "I handled most of the communication," my mother said quickly. Too quickly, like she had stepped forward before someone else could speak. I moved my eyes to her. "Most?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, your father has been struggling with organization lately. I helped keep things structured." That wording mattered. Structured, not managed, not filtered. Structured sounded harmless, but in practice, structure can decide what someone sees and what they don't. I turned slightly toward the hallway where the study was. No one stopped me. That was new. Normally, people stop you when you're close to something they don't want opened. I pushed the study door open. It was exactly how I remembered it. Books stacked, papers organized, my father's chair slightly angled toward the window like he always preferred. But something small was wrong. The landline phone wasn't in its usual place. I looked at my mother from the doorway. "Where is the landline logbook?" Her expression tightened instantly. "We don't use that anymore." That was not true. My father always kept written logs, calls, appointments, reminders. He trusted paper more than devices. I stepped inside, opened the desk drawer. It wasn't empty, but it had been reorganized. Not messy, not chaotic, controlled. Files grouped by date range. Recent months were noticeably thinner. I pulled one out. December. Almost empty. That was wrong. I looked up. "Who cleaned this room?" My mother answered again. "I did." Ethan spoke at the same time. "Mom mostly keeps things tidy." The overlap wasn't natural. It was coordinated, not rehearsed like a script, but maintained like a routine. That's when I noticed something else. A small notebook tucked behind the desk organizer. Different from my father's usual logs. Newer, cleaner handwriting. Not his. I opened it. The first page listed medication times. Second page listed appointment reminders. Third page had something that made my chest tighten slightly. "Do not discuss Rachel unless asked directly." No signature, no explanation, just a rule. I turned slowly back toward them. "This is not organization," I said quietly. No one responded. "This is restriction." My mother's face went pale. "That's not what it is." But she didn't explain what it was. That was the difference. I held up the notebook. "Whose handwriting is this?" Silence. Ethan looked away. My father stepped forward slightly, but stopped halfway. "I don't recognize that," he said slowly, but even he didn't sound sure. And that uncertainty mattered more than denial, because denial fights truth. Uncertainty avoids it. I walked back into the living room, notebook still in my hand. Now the picture was starting to form. Not a single event, not a single mistake, a system. Small adjustments over time, communication filtered, memory reinforced, access controlled. Not dramatically, not criminally obvious, just carefully enough that no single action looked wrong on its own, until everything added up. I stopped in the center of the room. "One of you," I said quietly, "has been managing what reaches my father." My mother shook her head immediately. "No, Rachel, that's not fair." But she didn't say impossible. Ethan finally spoke again, more carefully this time. "We were trying to help him stay stable." That word again, stable. I turned toward him. Stable for who? No answer, because that question had no safe direction. And for the first time since I walked into this house, I stopped thinking like someone trying to understand a misunderstanding and started thinking like someone inside an investigation that had already been running long before I arrived. The notebook was still in my hand when I spoke again. This time, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. What exactly are you protecting him from? That question landed differently. Not sharp, not emotional, just direct, and that made it harder to avoid. My mother looked at me for a moment, then away again. Ethan didn't move at all. My father stood near the edge of the room like he wasn't sure if he was part of the conversation anymore. Finally, my mother spoke. He was starting to forget you in pieces. The words didn't come out dramatic. They came out exhausted, like she had been holding them for too long and finally let them fall. I didn't react immediately, not because I didn't understand, but because I did. My mother looked at me now, really looked at me, as if bracing for impact. Not all at once, she added quickly. It started small, names, dates, then conversations, then entire days he couldn't recall properly. My grip tightened slightly around the notebook. My father finally spoke, quieter than before. I remember trying, he said. His voice wasn't defensive. It was uncertain. That was worse, because uncertainty meant he couldn't even fully trust his own memory anymore. Ethan stepped in slightly. We didn't know what else to do, he said. He would panic when he realized he forgot things. He'd get confused, then upset. It wasn't safe leaving him alone with certain decisions. I looked at him. Like writing letters? He hesitated. Yes. That single word shifted the air again. So it wasn't one lie. It wasn't one manipulation. It was a system built around prevention, or at least what they believed was prevention. I turned back to my mother. So you filtered his communication? She shook her head immediately. No, we didn't filter. We guided him. That's still control, I said quietly. No one disagreed. That silence told me they knew it too. My father rubbed his hand across his forehead. I didn't want you to see me like that, he said suddenly. I looked at him. Like what? He struggled for the words. Not in control. The room went still, because that was the truth sitting underneath everything else. Not just illness, not just confusion, pride. My father's identity had always been built around control over his home, his decisions, his image. And now that control was slipping. My mother stepped forward slightly. We were trying to protect him from humiliation, she said softly, and you from unnecessary distress. I looked at her for a long moment. By telling him I didn't want to come home? Her eyes dropped. We didn't say it like that. But she didn't correct what they did say. That distinction mattered. I exhaled slowly. Now the structure was visible. My father was declining. They were managing him. But somewhere in that management, they had crossed a line. Not into fabrication, but into interpretation. And interpretation, repeated often enough, becomes belief. I opened the notebook again, flipped through the pages. Medication schedules, reminders, rules. One line repeated again and again. Do not discuss Rachel unless prompted. I looked up. Who wrote this? No answer. I stepped closer to Ethan. You knew about this, I said. He shook his head immediately. I knew Dad was struggling, that's it. I held his gaze. Struggling doesn't create rules about what someone is allowed to talk about. His jaw tightened slightly. We were trying to keep him calm. That's not an answer, I said. Silence again, but this silence felt different, weaker, less unified, like the structure they had built was starting to separate at its edges. I turned slowly toward my father. Did you ever say I didn't want to come home? He blinked, then hesitated. I paused. I said it might not be good timing. I nodded once. That matched what I was hearing. Not rejection, not exile, uncertainty. I looked back at my mother. So where did the letter come from? Her face tightened. We already told you. He wrote it. I nodded slightly. No, I said quietly. That tone wasn't his decision alone. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Rachel, I cut him off. Someone shaped it into certainty. The room went still again, because this time, no one denied it immediately, not even my mother. And that was the moment I understood something important. They weren't hiding a single action. They were avoiding accountability for a process, a slow one, a human one that had started with protection and ended with isolation. I closed the notebook gently, then said the question that changed everything. Who benefits from me not being here? No one answered, but this time they all looked at each other before looking away, and that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just about my father anymore. It was about control of the space he was living in, and I had just walked into the center of it. The question hung in the air longer than any of the answers had. Who benefits from me not being here? No one spoke. But silence this time wasn't empty. It was fractured. My mother looked at the floor. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck like he was trying to decide whether honesty would make things better or worse. My father stood still, but his eyes were no longer focused on me. They were somewhere else, inside, like he was trying to retrieve something he wasn't sure he still had access to. Finally, Ethan exhaled. We thought it would be easier, he said. That wasn't an answer to my question, but it was the closest thing I was going to get. Easier for who? I asked. He hesitated. For him, he said quietly, and for you. I let that sit for a second, then shook my head once. No, I said. Easier would have been telling me the truth. My mother finally spoke, her voice thin. We didn't think you'd understand it properly from a distance, and he was declining faster than we expected. That word again. Declining. Not danger, not crisis. Declining. Like something gradual enough to manage instead of confront. I turned to my father. Did you want me here? He blinked slowly. He stopped. Tried again. I wanted you to come, he said. My chest tightened slightly. But, he looked away. But I didn't want you to see me like this. That was it. The core of everything. Not rejection, not exile. Shame. My father's entire life had been built around being dependable, in control, the one who didn't need help. And now he needed help more than anyone in the room could comfortably admit. I looked at the notebook in my hand, at the rules written inside it, at the structure built around him, and I finally understood what had happened. It wasn't a single decision, it was layers. First concern, then management, then restriction, then interpretation, and finally, avoidance disguised as protection. The letter wasn't forged, it wasn't rewritten, it was shaped by fear, by fatigue, by people trying to stabilize something they didn't fully understand. I set the notebook down on the table, slowly, carefully. So what now? I asked. No one answered immediately because there was no easy version of that answer. My mother wiped her eyes quickly. He needs care, she said quietly. Real care, not just us trying to manage things alone anymore. Ethan nodded slightly. We've been trying to handle everything internally. I looked at him. And shutting me out was part of that? He didn't deny it. That was his answer. I turned back to my father. He finally met my eyes properly. For the first time I arrived, there was something raw there. Not authority, not distance, just exhaustion. He didn't want to hurt you, he said quietly. I nodded once. I know. That surprised him, because I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been before. Anger requires certainty, and I finally had clarity instead. I believe that, I added. A long pause followed. Then I spoke again. But you still did. The room went silent this time, Not tense, just honest. My father lowered his head slightly, and for a moment, no one tried to fix it. No explanations, no interruptions, just truth sitting in the space between us. Finally, I picked up my bag. Ethan stepped forward slightly. "Where are you going?" he asked. I looked at him. Somewhere I'm actually included in the decision to be there. He didn't argue, because he couldn't. I walked toward the door, slowly. My mother followed a few steps behind me, stopping just short of reaching me. "Rachel," she said softly. I turned slightly, not fully. "Yes?" She hesitated. "I'm sorry." It wasn't enough to fix anything, but it was the first thing that sounded unguarded. I nodded once, then opened the door. Cold air hit me immediately. Clean, sharp, real. Before stepping out, I looked back once more. Not for closure, not for resolution, just acknowledgement. Then I said quietly, "Next time, don't manage me out of my own family." And I left. Outside, the night was silent. But for the first time since the letter arrived, it didn't feel like I was walking into something unknown. It felt like I was finally walking out of something I had been kept out of without being told.